Hey there guys, today we're taking a look at Need for Speed Unbound running on the AMD Ryzen 5 5500U. Now the game is currently running with the lowest in-game graphics settings and we do have FSR 2.0 enabled. Now this is the system with 16 gigabytes of RAM. It's important to mention that because if you have only 8 gigabytes of RAM, you cannot launch the game. Or rather, you can launch the game, but only up until the main menu. Once you actually try to load into the world itself, you are going to run into some pretty major issues. I was pretty much always crashing to desktop with an error, and it pretty much just had to do with being extremely limited in terms of RAM. So 8 gigabytes of RAM is completely undoable on this, and you're really going to have to just upgrade to 16, or if you're on a system that just does not let you upgrade, you're pretty much out of luck here. Now personally, for a $70 game, I don't really think you're missing out on much. I have been playing some Need for Speed Heat. That's the one I've been playing the most consistently recently, and I found this one very difficult to control by comparison. Every time I would try to do a drift or a turn, I always found it to be just very difficult to get the vehicle to actually turn. Like, it would not really register a drift. It would mostly just act like I'm trying to just turn normally. So the controls definitely feel very odd by comparison to Need for Speed Heat. And I'm not 100% sure if that's just based off of the performance that I was just getting or if I'm just that terrible. So ignore the actual gameplay in my terrible driving and just pay attention to the performance. Our 1% lows are pretty low, as are our averages, but they are at least close enough to each other that it is at least consistent, though it's not an amazing overall experience. Now this is at the stock 15 watt TDP, so we can try to actually raise the TDP and hopefully boost our performance and try to get to at least a 30 FPS average. Unfortunately, doing that doesn't really do anything to boost the overall experience of the game. Just driving around right now in the open world, you'll see that our 1% lows are pretty much in the same range, and so are our averages. Driving around in the open world or even getting into races pretty much end up giving us the exact same result here. So the uplift from the raised TDP is pretty much non-existent in this game, and it really seems like FSR 2.0 is doing a lot of heavy lifting here to get this to even remotely a playable range. You could definitely get used to playing the game like this, but it is one of those things where it's not the most ideal scenario, especially in situations when you're doing some high-speed driving. Originally, I planned to do pretty much all of the testing in the multiplayer, but it was almost impossible to find any lobbies, really. Every time I would just queue up for a race, I would have maybe 1 or 2 people join in, and then the race would start and it would just be 3 of us going, and one person would end up just disconnecting halfway through. So the multiplayer for this game really seems a bit dead right now. Again, I don't know who's really paying $70 for this game. I certainly find a lot of the new aspects of the art style to be interesting. I do actually like a lot of the effects of it. Depending on what you're doing, sometimes you can actually get into races where the level of performance that you're getting is halfway decent, with averages actually hitting 30s and our 1% lows being in the mid 20s. Not the most ideal situation, but it is at this point far more playable, but it really is going to fluctuate quite a bit here. It really just depends on the specific race and the specific location on the map. So it's one of those things where it borders on being a really decent experience, but sometimes it really just drops the ball. So it really just depends on what you're doing here. We're pretty much at the edge of a good experience overall. And again, this is FSR 2.0 doing a lot of the heavy lifting. Once you drop things down to 720p and you use FSR 2.0, you actually start to get some really nice performance numbers for the most part. 1% lows will still struggle here and there depending on what you're doing exactly, but in general they tend to keep around a 30 FPS range and your averages will be around the 40s. But it really just all depends on what you're doing exactly. With that said though, at this point we are running the game at such a low resolution that there is some pretty major rough effects that end up happening. Specifically, if you pay attention to other vehicles, there is some very noticeable ghosting that ends up happening, and once you start to get into really high speeds, it's actually really difficult to see what is even in front of you, because a lot of the times things turn into a blurry mess. So while you can get playable numbers on here, it can be really rough to really know what is even going on. Especially in nighttime races, I found it very difficult to really even notice what is in front of me a lot of the time. And it just has to do with how noticeable the ghosting can actually end up being. Vehicles could just end up turning into blurry blobs that will be very difficult to really pinpoint exactly where they're at, and things can kind of just blend into each other because of the excess amount of ghosting. Specifically, the headlights of vehicles, the lighting that they end up doing, it can be very difficult to tell whether you're just looking at the light itself or if it's the whole vehicle. It all kind of just gets blurred together into one thing. It's just not detailed enough to really be able to tell all the information that you really need. You could certainly work around it, and the level of performance you're getting is good enough that I think you would probably adjust to it, but it was something of a annoying learning curve here, especially playing with the built-in monitor because it's already a smaller screen. Everything's just blurry in general, so it would be kind of difficult sometimes to really tell what is even going on. But we are at least getting some playable levels of performance, so it really just depends on what you're willing to tolerate here and what you can adjust to. But anyways, I hope you found this quick look at the game useful. Again, if you are on 8 gigabytes of RAM, do not even bother with this game. It will end up crashing out on you. It will just be frustrating. The game will launch, it will let you go into the menu, but as soon as you try to load into the multiplayer or into the single player, it will just end up crashing while it's loading. So keep that in mind. If you found this video helpful, useful, or entertaining, be sure to subscribe, and I will see you guys next time.